Let me start by saying how fantastic it is to see this room full, this forum with both the elements of it, the educational element, the arts element here, coming together to discuss what we can do, to do business. Alistair, you just described it as essentially a dating bureau, which I think is a very good metaphor. I'm hoping it'll be more socially beneficial dating than the sort of dating that the current Secretary of State for Culture goes in for. I think it could possibly be much more fruitful and much more respectable as well. So I just wanted to thank the organisers of this event for bringing everybody together, and thank you all for being here. And I think not only the sessions, but also when you talk at lunch, I think the product of your networking, your discussions, your imagination will be really exciting. And I don't actually think that this could have happened 5 or 6 years ago. I think this event itself is evidence of how our thinking is going on. And I personally am very excited by that. I think Alistair set a very good agenda about research, career pathways, and, if you like, civic development. I'm going to leave research to one of the other speakers who knows rather more about that than I do. So I'm going to more address in what I'm going to say, if taking your agenda, Alistair, career pathways and civic. Now, of course, let's remind ourselves the Arts Council itself is, in essence, a development agency for arts and culture. And everything it does is about a partnership. There's nothing the Arts Council does on its own. It is a facilitator. It can't do anything without being in partnership with all sorts of bodies. And you mentioned, Alistair, the funding climate of the last 5 or 6 years. It's quite interesting that since 2010-11, when Arts Council's grant in aid has probably been cut by just slightly over 30%, although as we know we got a slightly better settlement in the autumn statement for the next 4 years, that it was flat, but cut by about 30%. Now, interesting thing is that taxpayers' money, that grant in aid, mostly goes toward funding our national portfolio organisations, and many of you are in the room here today. There are just under 700 of those. Now, here's an interesting statistic for you. In that era, when there's been that 30% cut, the overall cake, that is the aggregate revenue of those national portfolio organisations, has grown. It's actually grown. Now, it's a sort of dirty little secret. I don't advertise it to number 11 Downing Street very much, because it's not the best way to go in and beat the drum for arts funding if you say we're doing okay. But what it tells me, and what rather excites me, is that it shows that our larger arts organisations, the backbone of our arts and culture in this country, our national portfolio organisations, and as I say, many of you are in the room and you testify to this, have gone out and found other sources of revenue. And this is not in any way to downgrade the importance of public funding, which I regard, as we all regard, as a cornerstone of this. But you've gone out there and you've made partnerships and found other sources of revenue. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. Now, one of the things that slightly shocked me, and some of you will have heard me say this before, when I got to the Arts Council about 3.5 years ago, was that when I spoke to civil servants and MPs and politicians and some ministers, I have to say, shamefully, and asked them, why do we put public money into the arts? They didn't have an effing clue. They weren't against it, but they couldn't tell me. They couldn't articulate, why do we do it? And Alistair, I haven't done this on my own, but with all colleagues here in the room in arts and culture sector, we've made, I think, a lot of ground in the last 4 or 5 years in better articulating what the benefits of arts and culture are, and you can't really get public money in a time of austerity unless you can say what the benefits of what you do are. You do have to be able to articulate them. And as you know, we talk quite often about the holistic case, the intrinsic value of arts and culture, the social value, the educational value, and the economic value. I'm going to today focus on a couple of elements there, one educational and other heading is economic, because the civic and the career pathways come under those headings that you mentioned, Alistair. So let me first talk about higher education. Now, you indicated just now, Alistair, and I think quite rightly, and there are those of you from higher education in the room here today who will tell me precisely when this happened, but one of the things that's really fascinated me, and many of you are people I deal with month in, month out, and we've done great things together. Many of valued partners in higher education in the room today. Great to see you all here. People have become good friends. That universities have essentially redefined their role, not just as research institutions, not just as places of scholarship, but partners in their local community. And this has exemplified itself in many ways, but one of them is in arts and culture. So I was really interested and intrigued the moment I got the Arts Council to find out, that Derby University had reopened the local theatre, and of course it's now doing very well. That more recently, the University of the West of England had taken the top 2 floors of the Arnolfini Art Gallery, which had turned around its finance model, and now I see it shortlisted for Museum of the Year of the Art Fund competition. And then, of course, I realized that Oxbridge, that Kate was mentioning earlier, with a mild sneer, I noticed. Very good, excellent, always good to keep them on there, up to the mark. But Cambridge, with its 8 world-class museums, Oxford, with its 4 world-class museums, have always actually had this combination of civic and scholarship. But those examples I've just given were nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what I discovered running across the north. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to actually name-check quite a few of the projects, and several of you are in the room here today, because I think it's really interesting. But before I do, this idea of placemaking, very much featured in the Cultural White Paper the other day, which was published 3 or 4 weeks ago, featured now in every autumn statement and budget that George Osborne produces, because he drops little baubles, gifts. They're all welcome, I can assure you, of investing in arts and cultural institutions that he chooses to, fine, in different places around the country, all with the understanding, explicit sometimes, implicit at other times, that they get the fact that arts and culture, and of course higher education, but arts and culture is central to placemaking. So in a way, we've sort of won that argument. So Alistair, the first example I had written down here was your own one, the way in which Teesside University now works with, helps fund, is just an absolute cornerstone partner of MIMA, Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art. And then my friends from Sunderland University, and that was one of the early trips I made to the National Glass Centre, a really important centre of craft skills, one of the most important centres of craft skills, wasn't in a good place, now is in a great place. And there it's become part of the Sunderland University, what should I call it, partnership, family, whatever you want to call it. Then John Moores University. So I was at a concert of the Liverpool Phil the other night, great Tchaikovsky there. I was with Nigel, the Vice-Chancellor. Not only is that now a funder of that orchestra, but Nigel's become the chair of the orchestra. That's extraordinary. And there are a variety of reasons for this, and I think we'll hear more about this during the day. And you're quite right, we do need to get a common language between arts, culture, and universities. So I do hope we're able to unpack today what the motivations of arts and culture are, what the motivations of universities are, so that we're closer together in realizing common goals. At Lancaster University, a partner in Lancaster Arts, which is also funded by the Arts Council. The University of Salford has got this partnership with the Octagon Bolton, the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester, the Liverpool Everyman, with their MA in playwriting. And let's remember, our culture has to reflect our society. New writing is it's like the marrow bone, if you like, of the national conversation. And so that's why something like that is so exciting to see a partnership like that. Bradford University partners in the Bradford Literary Festival. Here we are in Leeds, and Richard, I was here, I think 2 years ago, when Opera North are partners in fundraising fellowships. So this is a course for professional fundraisers in the arts and cultural world, accredited by Leeds University, and now I think we're going into our 3rd cohort of that. These are really, really important steps forward and really fruitful collaborations. The University of Sheffield and Sheffield Hallam have got this 4-year program now, which was based on the very successful Year of the Maker. which was funded, going forward is being funded out of the Arts Council fund called Ambition for Excellence. At the University of Newcastle, involved there and supporting the Hatton Gallery, which is managed by Tyne and Weir Museums, which is one of the Arts Council's partnerships. Northumbria University, one of the early examples I met who are partners in Baltic 39, the art gallery in the city of Newcastle, just across the river from the Baltic. And also, they've got 3 MAs in visual arts, and there's the New Writing North collaboration between New Writing North and Northumbria University, again, collaborating on their MA, which is Writing and Enterprise module of that MA. So that actually is a fairly extraordinary list, and I think we should celebrate it. It's a really, really interesting list. Think of all the different things it goes across. Now, as I understand it, and I think it's something we should unpack today, the motivation of universities is varied. They've got undergraduates now who mostly pay £9,000 a year and expect to have a good time. And when you have a good time, you need a really rich cultural experience. And they're quite up to complaining if they don't, so I understand. You need to have a place that your graduates may go into in arts and culture. And supporting arts and cultural organizations means there is a first step for arts and cultural graduates. You want a healthy, active, fruitful, cultural environment in your community because that's why students will come to your university in the first place. That's why you're an attractive place to come. And that's why eventually people also would want to come and work in an area for the businesses, which is why it's an investment in the community. Now, I may have missed some things, but that's what I understand is the motivation of universities. Now, let me just say now a word or two about the creative industries, because we've got some really interesting research at the Arts Council about how arts and culture is the incubation for the creative industries. And we know that the creative industries are now growing at more than twice the rate of the economy. Not difficult at the moment, actually, to grow at more than twice the rate of the economy, but they're growing actually probably 3 times as fast now the economy has slowed down. We know they're growing employment at 4 or 5 times faster than the rate of the economy, so they're really important. We've got spillover studies that show that people who start training in publicly supported theatre go in to create economic value in films and TV and commercial theatre afterwards. I mean, anecdotally, it's Danny Boyle who starts off as a trainee director at the Royal Court, ends up doing Slumdog Millionaire, a multi-million-dollar earning Oscar-winning movie. I also note that in the political dialogue that I think we are winning, we have tax credits for many activities in the creative industries, including now in arts and culture, for orchestras, for performing arts, and I hope shortly for museums and galleries. And I often say to people in government, do you know why you're doing these tax credits? And they're helping us, and I'm not meaning to be aggressive to them, but I do point out to them, you do it for us, you don't do it for the boot and shoe manufacturers. Why is that? Because we are not just about the creative industries. It is not just an economic argument. It's something more than that. You're investing in our culture. You're investing in our quality of life, our national conversation. So that's why you should have tax credits for something which is about something broader and more important, actually, than merely an economic argument. Now, just before I close, I want to say a word or two about diversity. Because you know, in both the higher education sector and the arts and cultural sector, that we have to do a lot better. You know the Arts Council is working very hard, and a colleague of mine from the National Council is here today, David Bryan. We've all been working very hard to try to take this agenda mainstream, not merely to fund organizations that are predominantly BAME, as defined in the past 51%, but to say to all organizations, if you've got public money, that should be for everybody's benefit. It should draw on all the talents. Now, in terms of arts graduates from universities going into arts and culture, notwithstanding all the work we have to do to make arts and culture properly reflect the entire society and draw on all the talents, I just put a challenge out to my higher education colleagues. Can you do more to make arts and culture more attractive? I have a suspicion, but I can't prove this, that there are certain people who would be brilliant, who are very creative, who might be under pressure from their parents not to go into something that's more of a freelance industry. No, get yourself a proper qualification. That's fine, of course, that's a brilliant aspiration. But let's not lose a generation of creative people who would be brilliant and who ought to be given the advice to go in that direction. So I hope that higher education can play a real role in helping feed into, because I think I'm right in saying 50% of each generation now goes into higher education. The AHRC is nodding, so that's all right. I haven't bogged up on that one. Can you play a role, and what strategies would you do to encourage the cream of talent from every background and every colour and creed, as it were, to take their creative talents into the arts and culture world? Not just arts and cultural organisations, but the creative industries generally. That, I think, is really important. So in conclusion, I was much taken by an article I read last week in the Daily Telegraph, not a newspaper I read all the time, but this was brought to my attention. Sasha Romanovich is the CEO of Grant Thornton, and she wrote a really interesting article pointing out that if the whole of this country had a GVA per worker equal to the G7 average, we would add £479 billion to the British economy by 2025. And if you just restricted that down to York and Humberside would add 57 billion to the local economy by 2025. And in the article, she accepted that the creative industries are a really important part of how this country grows going forward. So it shows what the economic prize is if we can get arts and culture and the creative industries turbocharged by our universities. It's a very exciting prospect. But let me just say, and my very last remark of all this morning, that's not the real issue. That's a really important issue, but it's not the real issue. For me, the real issue, and what's even more exciting, is that what we're talking about with the partnerships that you'll be developing today, we're talking about growing our culture and our quality of life and all those things that we value above the mere economic. And that's the real prize. So I hope you have really fruitful conversations today. Thank you very much.